going on, everyone? It's Bales, and welcome back to another episode of AFL Fantasy Head2Head, where we put two players up against one another to see who we're picking between the two. This episode number 23 of the series, just 2 episodes to go after this episode. If you haven't checked out the other 22 episodes, make sure you go and do that. Make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and all that good stuff as well. Joining me, another special guest. You'll know him from FTTV. Fantasy Take TV with George and the boys over there. You've seen him on a few AFL Fantasy podcasts already this pre-season. It is JD, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. And very fitting that we've got number 23 rolling out, because LeBron James Sicily is what we refer to him. So to include, number 23, LeBron, it all works out very well. So the timing couldn't be better.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to this one. I'm interested in one particular player, but it's been good to put him up against another one. But it is the most talked about defender in the preseason. It is Nick Daicos and James Sicily in the head-to-head battle today. So JD will be taking Nick Daicos. I'll be taking James Sicily, and we'll be seeing who we're picking out of the two and if we've got either of them in our side. So JD, how about you kick us off, mate? Why should people be selecting Nick Daicos in 2024?
Look, I just wanted to run a negative campaign. I wanted to go straight for your throat on this episode, really get into the head-to-head. But why don't we start off with something positive and talk about Nick Daicos? And there is so much that can be said for Nick. In his second year last year, averaging nearly 110, just falling shy of it. And really, he was averaging much higher than that before the injury that knocked him down a bit, with him being taken out on 37 there. I think he absolutely presents great value, even though he starts as the most expensive defender in this year, because with that inside midfield time that he'll be getting this year, I can see that average going up even higher than what we've seen in the last 2 years. In fact, in the 3 games last year where he had 70% or more CBAs, he averaged 121 fantasy. And I think that is what we start to see this year. We see more midfield time, and we see him pushing up closer to that 115 to 120 range, which presents great value even at his expensive price point. On top of that, Nick Daicos, playing with the Premiership side, they've got a lot of Thursday, Friday games this year, which actually makes him a really good vice captain loophole option. And he's someone that has the ceiling to log some really good scores for us. So excited for him to be a part of that. Now, I should jump into the negatives and defend each of those as they come, because I think there's 2 main reasons why people are avoiding Daicos this year. And I think both of them are so-so reasons. So the first is that he could potentially be tagged by Finn McGuinness in round 4, 5, whatever it is, just before his bye. The reality is, we saw last year, even though the Finn tag was effective, one of those being injury affected, sure. We also saw that Collingwood was doing everything in their powers to make sure they free him up and still get him into good positions regardless of when he was tagged, and he worked through many others as a result of that. I think they're going to continue to put more time into that this year. They know more tags are going to come for him, and they know as a team they're going to have to work through that. So I feel like they are the type of club that will actually rally around him and free him up still, regardless of being tagged. So yes, he may have a slight down game, but not as bad as what we see with some other players when they get tagged and they drop, 50s, 60s, that type of thing. I just don't think that's realistically going to be something that we see with Daicos. And then the bye is another one. And yes, look, having the bye and being out for that is, of course, unfortunate. But I think when players represent enough upside or value at the price that they start, and if I have him starting at price at 109 and I think he's going 115 to 120 and giving me those vice captain and captain scores, then I'm not too worried about missing him for that one bye round. Yes, it probably takes a few points of value off, but I still think he represents the best value of any of the defender premiums that we have for last year. I think he's the only one that I reliably picture having upside. I think everyone else stays the same or goes backwards. So yes, even with that bye, I'm still happy to jump on Daicos. And the last thing here is a lot of people have cottoned on to the fact that bye flipping probably isn't a great move. So starting a player with the idea that once it comes around to their bye, so like Tom Green, you then swap him out to someone like a Walsh. And people have figured out that this isn't great because they don't want to have to plan their team around having to do this one trade 3 weeks out. It's very restrictive and can cause a lot of problems down the line. But they don't seem to recognize the same logic on the flip side, which is just pick Daicos up after his bye. which is you're still planning and baking in a trade from 5-6 weeks out that you may not be able to facilitate because he, well, firstly, could have got away from you in price. What happens if that fin tag doesn't come?
Yeah.
And secondly, if you're trying to force him in at that point at $1 million, even at 900K, there are no doubt going to be other players that are cheap and ripe for the picking at that point, and you can't get them because you're trying to force in Daicos. So I just think that the reasons to avoid him are outweighed by the tremendous upside that Daicos provides. And he is one, or I shouldn't spoil whether he's in my side or not. He's in my side. Look, I have played around with taking him out if I need money. I'm not absolutely wedded to it, but I do like him over a lot of the other defender premiums, as you can no doubt tell from this intro. So I will, I think, pause that point, Bales, and hand over to you. I think you've definitely given yourself the short end of the stick with trying to battle for Sicily here, but let's see what you've got in store. You've got 23 episodes under your belt now. You should have some fire coming out at me.
Yeah. Well, firstly, just with the Daicos point you made, that I probably hadn't thought about that as much, but when people have said about that flipping of like the Tom Green to a Sam Walsh, people are going, "Oh, I'm not as keen on it because if I get injuries or something in round 3, I then can't bring in a can't trade a Tom Green." But the same goes for bringing people in. If you get injuries in round 7, 8, and you can't get Daicos in, but then he's at 50% ownership. I think that in terms of actual like full teams, he's like near the 70% ownership. People are going to be running away with that pick, and then you're going to have to try and get it. I know a lot of obviously the content creators and people around the community aren't starting Daicos, but it's almost like you go against the grain. You start with a guy that could go so much better, and you get that leg up on everyone. So it is interesting. I've at the start of preseason, it was completely shut for me. I was like not touching Daicos. Whereas the more I've thought about it, the more that the doors it's creaked open a little bit. So I'm not ruling it out. But yeah, we'll obviously go through who if he's in my side or not later. But just with Daicos, so his opening run, he's got a little bit of a mixed bag. I think Daicos is that guy. It doesn't matter what fixtures he gets, but he's got Sydney in round 1. We've obviously seen Ryan Clark tag in the past. I don't know if they put a road bottom or something with him after, whether that's as effective as Ryan Clark would have been. And he's got Brisbane at the Gabba, which Brisbane, I think he scored well against Brisbane last year. So I don't see there's too much of an issue. St Kilda, I think he'll go big, especially Windhager if he ends up missing games. There won't be any sort of tag there either. I think he's then got Port after his bye as well. So we spoke about Hawthorn. So do you see any sort of issues other than the Hawthorn game that a few people might be looking at? Or is it just that you see Hawthorn potentially is the main issue, if there is even one from your standpoint?
So what Port sent Drew to him somewhat effectively. Swans have obviously tagged or attempted to tag in the past. Saints, I think, have mucked around with tags as well. Look, I think, even if he's not tagged, every team is going to be planning for Daicos. Like, guarantee that. Like, this is not new news, but they were also doing that at the end of last year, and somewhat unsuccessfully. So it's interesting. He's the only player that we talk about as being tagged in every game or having teams just plan for him defensively. He's the only player that we actually seem to throw this concern over in the preseason, despite the fact that every year when the season actually starts, tags don't really seem to come until later in the year. Most teams are trying to play their own game plan. They're not trying to, use one tagger defensively. So I feel like it's very overblown, and we're only focusing that attention on Daicos. And the reason why is because he's probably going to be the best player in the league, and you get him to select him as your defender for one more year while he's still underpriced. So I think you can bet against him. Like, he's obviously expensive. He's not going to go up, I think, another 300K and really be a season killing pick by not starting him. But I am much more comfortable beginning him than almost anyone else over 900K, because he's the only one that I clearly see having value left in his price. Very obviously, and really no reason to regress. If anything, with some of these other players moving out, like Adams leaving the side and stuff, and how weak their midfield's looking, Daicos is going to be the number 1 CBA mid in that team for this year. Like, I just don't see any reason why he wouldn't be. Yeah,
I think I agree with that statement as well. I think he will be the number 1 guy in there. The final point, we'll go with Daicos and move to Sicily. I don't think I'm winning this head-to-head battle, but with Daicos, people talk about Finn McGuinness, whether he even plays or not, because people don't know if he's best 22. In the practice game on the weekend, he didn't actually come on until in the third quarter. So people are like, is he even going to be there round 4? I think that probably the answer is probably, if he does come in, he probably will be for that game because of how successful it was last year. Granted, Daicos got injured, but do you think that there's a chance that Finn McGuinness doesn't play and that people are talking about this tag and then Daicos runs away with it?
We'll see round 0, but this is part of the problem with if he's fringe, right? It's hard to plan whether he'll be there in round 4 or whatever to tag. I think the Drew's another interesting one where he has tagged in the past, but you've got Wines coming in to be the third CBA mid with Rosie and Butters. So are they realistically going to move one of them out to play Drew for 80% CBAs with Daicos? I just, Rowbottom, I don't think can actually run with him, to be perfectly honest.
I agree. Yeah.
So yeah, so the funny thing is, right, like even you get past round 6 and he's been tagged a couple of times, I'm sure at that point in the season, you're going to be able to look at the next 5 teams he plays and go like, oh, they could tag him, they could tag him, they could tag him. Because that's what we're going to say all year, of course.
Yeah.
Like, can we tag him? But are the tags going to be prohibitive enough that it actually stops him from being a good pick? And I just don't think the answer is yes. There's very few players that can actually run with him when he's fit and firing. And maybe that's the only real knock on Daicos is obviously he finished last year with an injury. And then I think he had, was it a little bit of groin soreness that they had to manage through the preseason? And that's probably the biggest concern I have with him. Outside of that, I think he's going to be able to work through whatever gets thrown at him.
Yeah, and it is all a good point you raised, and I think that this is why I wanted to get you on for this episode, because I thought that the Daicos, I know you were talking on Hat Chat, you were saying that you were keen on him, and I think you've raised a good point to certainly open the door even more for Daicos for starting in my side. But we will move to Sicily and see how we can go with him. So just reference just at the start, but yeah, Daicos 982k, 47.78% ownership. But if people are following the sort of the stats and that, I know it's been put out there that it is actually closer to that 70% mark for teams that actually complete, because there's a lot of teams haven't been fully filled out or anything like that. Sicily, 943k. So he is 39k cheaper, average 104.5 last year from the 19 games. I guess that the problem with Sicily at the start was when Blank went down with the ACL, people were like, where are they going to fill this hole? Is Sicily going to play? Have to play a taller defender, lockdown defender? What's going to happen? I think what I saw on the weekend from Hawthorn is that I think Ethan Phillips looked pretty good coming on in the third quarter, and I think that he's going to get more of a run with it. I think they played this Saturday, if I'm not mistaken, against the Dogs again. So I'm interested to see how Phillips goes. But if Phillips looks good, I don't think there's as much of a worry of Sicily playing a lockdown role as what maybe people probably originally thought, because Phillips, they picked him up. I can't remember, one of the commentators on the game said something like the last 17 winners of the medal that Phillips got have been AFL players. So he's clearly a good player, and he's come in and he's only been there for a couple of weeks, and he looked really at home on the weekend. But in terms of Sicily, we know that he's got a massive ceiling. Like he has got some big scores in here, and I haven't got Sicily's number. I was wondering why his numbers were so low. I've got bloody Cherry up on my DFS. That's why it wasn't quite coming up with the Sicily numbers. I thought one score of 149. I'm like, no, that's not right. But we'll get Sicily's numbers up right now. But we know he's got as high ceiling, if not probably the highest ceiling in the defensive line of any player. So like just some scores that he had last year. He had a 151 in round, so that was the last round in round 2022, sorry. 151 then, but he got a 130 in round 1 last year, 132, 115, 125, 165, 130. They were in back-to-back weeks, those big ones as well. 121, another 160 there as well. He's got some massive scores there, and as I said, his ceiling is sort of unparalleled in that way. But it's a bit hard, I guess, JD, to sort of compare him to Daicos, but it was probably the nearest comparison I could do with Daicos in defensive line. So if talking positively with Sicily for a bit, what do you see as the positives to picking someone like a James Sicily in your defensive line at D1?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? I don't know why, but as soon as you said it's a close comparison, I instantly started thinking of who else I'd compare him to. I actually think just as in hindsight, Sheasel probably would have been an interesting comparison, just because Sheasel's on the 1 year behind journey, and the price point is value versus anyway. Different conversation for a different time. Yeah. Sorry, what was the Sicily question?
Yeah. No, and I would have done Sheasel, but unfortunately did have him with Duggan with Jane earlier, so I didn't want to quite overlap. Mate, but you are right. I think Sheasel would have been
wasting a good comparison on Duggan, I must say. But yeah.
Yeah, I know. At the time, it seemed like a really good comparison, and Jane was said that they'd be a good one to chat about. But But yeah, in terms of I was just saying Sicily. What are some of the sort of positives you could see with selecting him before we go into the sort of the other side of Sicily as well?
Yeah, so Sicily for me, I think, is probably the most important player to any single side across the competition. I think, especially with the Hawks injury. So without him, like the amount of wins or potential wins or expected wins that Hawks lose, I think that's the biggest loss for any team if Sicily goes down. So I think that places an emphasis on how important Sicily is to that side, and that's what Sam Mitchell had the realization with midway through last year, where we actually need to free him up and let him play that natural role because, yes, while he can play lockdown, we lose so much offensively. And so I think they are going to try and do anything they can to continue to free him up this year and let him play loose and let him play that natural game, because that is when they looked their most dangerous and had their best chance of winning. So, I know the injuries are a concern, but I think Sammy Mitchell saw the light, and that was really when he became quite a dominant force in the middle of last year. I was actually one of the few coaches that had him. I think when he got suspended, there was maybe 9 or 10 of us in the top 100, and I was one of them. So it ended up being a really big deal. But yeah, as you kind of read out with those scores, he'd went 125, 165, 130 in the lead up to that suspension. It was just everywhere. The Hawks had won 3 games in a row at that point as well on the back of Sicily's huge performances. So yeah, I think they are going to continue to try and put him in spots where he actually can play that natural role, despite the injuries that have occurred this preseason.
Yeah, and I agree. As you said, I think probably the two that come to mind is Sicily and probably Max Gawn are probably the two the two most important players to their own sides. But I think Sicily is one, because if take him out of that Hawthorn side, I think they'd pretty much be odds on to win the wooden spoon. I think it would almost be that bad because of how big a loss he would be. So we'll move to the negative side of Sicily. I think we all know what the negative side is. It's the unfortunate for us, but just the brain fades, just the silly sort of acts on the field that might get him suspended or something like that. And obviously, there's been the talk of obviously Blank being injured. Obviously, his average drops a fair bit as well. But I sort of wanted to get your thoughts on picking a player that could get suspended at any week, and then also mixed in with the fact that we don't know quite what's happening with this Hawthorn back line. I was talking high about Ethan Phillips, but there's no guarantee he's actually going to be playing in round one. So what are your thoughts with Sicily on this sort of the negative side of the comparison?
So interestingly, you went with the disciplinary side, because I think one of the things that Sicily has done well, especially since becoming captain, is rein some of that temper in. So yeah, he had the unfortunate slim tackle event, which got him suspended for weeks, and I think rightfully so.
Twice last year. Can you get suspended twice?
He might have had another suspension on the back of that.
He hit Caminiti. Was it Caminiti? I'm pretty sure. At some point. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in round 11, he hit Caminiti in round 11, got suspended for a week.
Yeah,
came back against Brisbane, then got suspended for 3 weeks. Yeah, so it was 2 suspensions in the space of 2 weeks.
Yep. Yeah. So I think look, it's a little bit concerning, but it's a bit like injuries. It's very hard to predict, to be perfectly honest. So and I think he's gotten better at managing it in general. I think like the sling tackle, while it deserved weeks, like that is a very hard one to predict. And
it's a football act in a way.
It wasn't like he was trying to hurt him or anything like that. He just made a bad tackle. And last year we saw a lot of players that I wouldn't necessarily say had disciplinary issues get suspended for acts that previously they wouldn't have. So I think that's something he'll adjust with. The Camera one probably a little bit less forgivable, but yeah, in general, that's probably not as much as what I'm concerned about. What's interesting when I had a look at Sicily in the past is actually so we focus a lot on Blank being out and him having quite a favorable split when Blank's in the side. There's actually a few other key tools or players like that where he has pretty favorable splits. And I think the conclusion I've come to is, firstly, he seems to do much better when dual rucks are playing. I don't know why, but I think it's the extra key tool then allows some of the extra structure to shift around the ground, which allows them to play the extra key defender. So if they don't play 2 rucks, then I'm a little bit worried about that. And he also played much better when some of their key forwards were in the side, like Kaziski. Who else was it as well?
Mitch Lewis.
It might have been Lewis, yeah. And I it might just be funny stuff, but I think it's partly because it allows the right structure down in defense. And also Sicily had a much better split in wins and losses. So in the 7 wins last year, he averaged 123 fantasy. In his 12 losses, he averaged 94. So maybe it's just having some of those other key posts actually allowed them to win. And maybe that's part of the negative as well with all these injuries. Can you actually see them improving on the 7 wins that Sicily was a part of last year? Maybe that's a cause for concern.
Yeah. No, it is good points you're raising with Sicily, and that's why it's sort of not quite sure sort of with his picking. You're probably looking at maybe fading a Sicily, but I think it's pretty obvious who you're picking here. Who you're picking out of
possibly.
Daicos
I actually have 2 more Sicily points which I want to share. So firstly is Hardwick's been moved to the forward line. He was one of the biggest kick intakers. Well, he was the biggest kick intaker for Hawks last year. I think he had 82. The next most was Sicily on 45. So look, there are a fair few kick-ins that are going around now that potentially helps Sicily a little bit if he's getting a couple extra game. I think to detract from this, and what we haven't touched on so far, is the move of Karl Amon into halfback. And over that period at the back end of the year where he did, Sicily didn't average as much as what we saw maybe through that first part of the year, especially that middle bit where he was really on fire. So I think there is some cause for concern that if Amon moves back in there, they start using some of these other players to distribute out rather than Sicily. And so while we'll still end up with a lot of those intercepting points from maybe marks and stuff like that, he won't necessarily be used in chains as much to exit D50, and that could limit him. So I think a bit of pros and cons, like Hardwick leaving more kick-ins, yay, but if that means Amon coming in there and being used as a rebounding halfback distributor over Sicily, potentially a negative.
Yeah.
All right.
I honestly completely forgot about the Amon pick just because he didn't play last week. I just sort of
It's very easy to fall the trap, right? Like out of sight, out of mind. Yeah.
But I recall the episode with DT11 the other day with Nick Martin and Karl Amon. So it's funny that I forgot about him in the space of only a couple of days. But anyway, we moved back to the actual comparison instead of me forgetting about Amon. Who are you picking between Daicos and Sicily in this head-to-head battle?
Yeah. So for me, it comes down to, am I more worried about regression from Sicily with some of the injuries and Amon potential news, and him not having the bye, does it outweigh the risks with Daicos having that bye, having the potential tags, but then also having that upside of natural development and moving more into the inside midfield? And for me, I don't think Sicily's outweighs Daicos. I would rather pay the 40K, start Daicos, and roll the dice with him. I see him as a very viable vice-captain, captain option. So if you're going value elsewhere, I think that makes him a really nice option over someone like a Sicily, who, while does have those big ceiling stores and could be a nice vice-captain, I don't think you could ever comfortably put the C on him.
Yeah, I agree. I think Daicos would be the guy I'm picking out of the two. But I think that the more important question with this is, I think we knew Daicos would probably win this head-to-head, but I think the question is, do you currently have Nick Daicos in your side, JD?
I do. I actually am playing around with the side at the moment where I'm like a few K short, but I will find money for Daicos. Yeah. He's in my current sides, and he's been in probably like 90% of them. If I want to cut down to 0 players above 900K, then Daicos goes out. But as soon as I put one player over 900K in, Daicos is first picked. So he's my favorite in that 900K plus range, even with the buy.
Yeah. I currently don't have either him or Sicily, but the doors open for Daicos to come in. So we'll see if I make that move. I've currently got Tom Stewart and Harry Sheasel in my current D1 and D2, but I could easily see me going up to it's only 100K. So it's only 100K. So we might do that, but we'll have to see how we go. But that is the head-to-head battle done. That is episode 23 in the books. Let us know in the comment section below if you guys are starting Nick Daicos firstly, and then who would you be picking out of Daicos and Sicily in the head-to-head battle? Let us know. And any other questions, put them in the comments section below. If you are watching on the video, like and subscribe. We very much appreciate it as we head towards 2,000 subscribers. We ticked over 1,400. We're near 1,500. So if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you get involved. And on the podcast, well, if you're listening on that, please leave us a 5-star rating review at AFL Fantasy Fanatics. We very much appreciate it. It does help out a lot. But JD, mate, thank you very much for jumping on for this episode, mate. Where can the people firstly find you across socials, and where can people find Fantasy Take TV across the platforms?
Mate, they don't really want to find me on the socials. But if they're desperate, like absolutely dying for content because there's none left, which I would be surprised with, because fantasy has killed it on the preseason content. There's actually not much on the Supercoach side this year, which is predominantly what I do. But you can find me on Twitter at Jackson Davey, or on YouTube same thing. Just search my name, Jackson Davey, and I should pop up. Fantasy Take TV. I cannot remember the Twitter handle for the life of me, but the podcasts are on Spotify and I think the normal usual places. I don't do the ad reads for that stuff, so don't ask me.
Yeah.
And then it also gets uploaded through George's channel on YouTube. So FTTV, George, or Supercoach George, one of those two, you'll find him.
Yeah.
We'll be around.
No, exactly right. Yeah, make sure you go and subscribe and follow across all the socials as well. On the next episode, we'll be talking about a couple of defenders, a little bit cheaper, under the 700K price bracket, but have been popular buzz names, especially the past couple of weeks, that you might be considering for your side. So we'll be talking about those in the next episode. But until then, thanks, JD, for jumping on, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode. So we're out. Cheers.